Welcome to the Roy Morgan Weekly Update. The Coalition now has a clear lead on a two-party preferred basis for the first time since the federal election. So they're on 51.5%, up 2%, ahead of the ALP at 48.5%, down 2%. The rise in support for the Coalition, or more accurately, the loss of support for the ALP, comes in the week of pro-Palestine student protests on university campuses. And this is all playing out against a backdrop of increased concern about crime and safety, and particularly the safety of women. Primary support for the ALP dropped for a second straight week and was down 2% to only 28.5% this week. The drop in ALP primary support drifted to minor parties and independents, not to the Coalition. Primary support for the Coalition was actually unchanged on 37% for a third straight week. If a federal election were held now, the Coalition would form a minority government, but with the support of minor parties and independents, the latest Roy Morgan survey shows. More women than men swung against the Albanese government, and look at the results in the different states. The strongest swings against the ALP on a two-party preferred basis were in Queensland, minus 7.5%, and Victoria, minus 6.5%. In addition to the national issues, in Queensland, the Stephen Miles-led ALP government is facing a state election defeat this year, while in Victoria, the Jacinta Allan-led ALP government has just handed down a state budget with spending cuts and no sign of any cost of living relief for consumers. In further concern for the Albanese government, Roy Morgan government confidence remained virtually unchanged this week at only 81, with the majority of Australians saying the country is heading in the wrong direction. 52% say the wrong direction, only 33% say the country's heading in the right direction. As a result, Roy Morgan government confidence remains well below the neutral level of 100. This week there was also a slide in consumer confidence. The ANZ Roy Morgan consumer confidence was down 1.8 points to 80.2. The indicators driving this fall relate to people's views on their own personal finances and the Australian economy over the next year. Looking longer term, consumer confidence has now spent a record 69 weeks below the level of 85. Consumer confidence has in fact continued to move in a narrow band of 80 to 85 over the last 25 weeks since early December. Analysis of consumer confidence by housing status, and remember Australian housing market is split roughly equally between outright home owners, people paying off their homes, and renters, about a third in each group. Well, the big mover this week was renters. The only group to react positively to the federal budget just a week earlier. This week, the renters reassessed their position and drove the weekly fall in consumer confidence. Consumer confidence for renters fell 6.5 points to 77.3 this week. And they're the only group to lose confidence this week. Homeowners continue to have the highest consumer confidence at 85.6, while people paying off their home, mortgages, continue to have their lowest consumer confidence at only 76.4, although this was up 0.8 points this week. This group, of course, is the one that's especially sensitive to Reserve Bank decisions on interest rates, and the Reserve Bank next meets in mid-June, in 3 weeks' time. There was virtually no movement in inflation expectations this week. It was up by 0.1% to 4.9%. So Australians now expect annual inflation to be 4.9% over the next 2 years. Inflation expectations have stayed within a narrow band of 4.8% to 5.3% since early December. And finally this week, to New Zealand. And both key indicators, government confidence and consumer confidence, remain below the neutral level of 100. However, both improved in May. Roy Morgan government confidence improved for a second straight month in May, up 10.5 points to 96. ANZ Roy Morgan New Zealand consumer confidence, the measure of consumers' economic sentiment, also improved, up 2.8 points to 84.9. However, the latest Roy Morgan poll shows the honeymoon is over for Prime Minister Christopher Luxon and his National-led government. Support for National dropped 3% to 33.5% in May and is now down 4.5% from 2 months ago. In contrast, support for Labor increased 5.5% in May and is now up 7% from 2 months ago. The combined movement means National now leads Labor by only 3.5%, down from 15% just 2 months ago. That's a change of 11.5 percentage points. So a total of 36.5% of electors support one of the minor parties, including the Greens, ACT, New Zealand First and the Maori Party. On an overall basis, the results for May mean that just 48.5% of New Zealanders now support Christopher Luxon's National-led government, down 4.5% since April. Support for National was 33.5%, ACT was 9.5% and New Zealand First was 5.5%. This is the first time since the election that government support has dropped below the crucial 50% mark. In contrast, support for the parliamentary opposition has increased for a second straight month and was up 4% to 47%. Support for Labor was 30%, the Greens 14% and the Maori Party 3%. And that's a wrap. Thanks for your interest this week in Roy Morgan's latest results, and I'll be back next week to bring you the most up-to-date readings on consumer confidence, inflation expectations and voting intentions. Thanks for listening.